Something happened this week that almost nobody is talking about the right way. A missile landed 9 kilometers from Israel's most guarded secret. Iran's parliament speaker went on television and said, and I'm quoting this directly, that Israel has entered a new phase of the battle. And on the exact same day, Donald Trump issued a military ultimatum with a 48-hour deadline, and then quietly walked it back before the clock even ran out. These two things happened in the same week. And I want you to stay with me for the next 15 minutes, because when you place them side by side, when you actually look at what they mean together, the picture that emerges is not the one you are getting from your daily headlines. This is not a story about missiles. This is not a story about diplomacy. This is a story about who actually holds the leverage right now. And the answer to that question is going to surprise you. Let us start with what happened at Dimona, because I think this is the most underreported and simultaneously the most misreported story of the entire conflict so far. The Israeli Ministry of Health confirmed at least 180 people were wounded in a single night of missile attacks on the southern city of Dimona and the nearby city of Arad. 180 people in a single night in the area immediately surrounding the most heavily defended installation in the entire state of Israel. Now, here is where I need you to pay close attention, because the reporting on this has been doing two contradictory things at once. It has been both overstating what happened and understating what it means. The IAEA confirmed there was no damage to the Shimon Negev Nuclear Research Center itself. No abnormal radiation levels were detected. The missile that struck Dimona hit a residential area of the city, not the research compound, which sits approximately 9 to 10 kilometers away. So I want to be absolutely clear on this point. There was no direct strike on the nuclear facility. That needs to be said plainly. But here is what also needs to be said plainly. Iran was aiming at that facility. Iranian state media explicitly stated the strikes were targeting the nuclear research facility in retaliation for what they described as a U.S. attack on Iran's Natanz uranium enrichment site earlier that same day. Iran aimed at Israel's nuclear compound. The missile landed 9 kilometers short, and the Israeli Air Force's own spokesman confirmed that the interception systems were activated and failed, not in one location, in two, Dimona and Arad, on the same night, simultaneously. And I want you to hear exactly how the Israeli military described the missiles that got through. They were, and I'm reading directly from the official statement, not special, not unfamiliar, conventional Iranian ballistic missiles, the kind that had been fired throughout this conflict, conventional missiles, against the most defended airspace in Israel, and 2 of them got through. Interceptors were launched. They missed. Direct hits. Warheads weighing hundreds of kilograms. The strike sheared the facades off multiple apartment buildings. Rescue workers described widespread damage across at least 10 apartment blocks in Arad. 3 of them so badly damaged they were considered at risk of collapse. A 10-year-old child was left in serious condition with shrapnel injuries. The Israeli Air Force responded to questions about the interception failures by saying they were not a systemic problem and that the circumstances in each case were unrelated. I have to be honest with you, that explanation is very difficult to accept. 2 simultaneous interception failures on the same night in the same region around the most sensitive military installation in the country. And we are being told these were coincidental and unrelated individual failures. The Iranian parliament speaker said this openly. If Israel cannot intercept missiles in the heavily protected Dimona area, it is operationally a sign of entering a new phase of the battle. And an Israeli political analyst quoted this week in the Times of Israel added something that I think everyone needs to hear. If such a sensitive security site were damaged even minimally, it can be assumed that Israel would need to respond in an exceptional manner. It would not be able to suffice with a parallel strike on nuclear sites in Iran, since it is already doing so in any case, an exceptional manner. Read that carefully. We are in a conflict where both sides have already struck each other's nuclear-related infrastructure. Israel has hit Natanz multiple times. Iran has now targeted the Dimona region directly, and Israeli analysts are publicly using the phrase exceptional manner to describe what comes next if the trajectory continues. I have deliberately avoided certain language in these programs because I think precision matters more than drama. But I will say this directly. We are very close to the outer edges of what can be managed without catastrophic miscalculation. And I believe that recognition, understood privately even if not stated publicly, is part of what is driving the diplomatic developments of this past week, which brings me to the Hormuz Ultimatum and to what I think is the most revealing story of the week. Last weekend, Donald Trump issued what he called a 48-hour ultimatum to Iran. Reopen the Strait of Hormuz, he said, or the United States would obliterate Iran's power plants. He used that word, obliterate. He posted it on Truth Social. He stated it publicly. He gave a specific time window. It had the structure and the language of a genuine military ultimatum from the most powerful country in the world to a country that has been blocking the world's most critical energy transit choke point. And then, hours before the deadline expired, hours before, not after any Iranian action, not in response to any Iranian concession, Trump announced a delay. He said there had been what he described in capital letters as very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of hostilities. Iran's foreign ministry responded immediately. There is no dialogue between Tehran and Washington. No dialogue, flat denial. And then Iran's military spokesman added something that deserves to be quoted carefully. He asked whether the United States was, and I am paraphrasing here, negotiating with itself to save face. The IRGC spokesman asked publicly whether America's internal struggle had reached the point where it was holding talks with itself. Now Trump gave Iran a second deadline. By the end of the week, he said, open the strait or face the power plant strikes. The end of the week arrived. The strait remained closed, and Trump extended the deadline again. He posted on social media that he was pausing the threat by 10 days to Monday, April 6th. And he described this pause as having been made, quote, as per Iranian government request. Let me say that again slowly. The Iranian government, which has publicly and repeatedly denied that any negotiations are taking place with the United States, apparently requested a 10-day extension of the deadline, and Trump granted it. This is where I need you to think very carefully about what this sequence actually represents. Trump issued an ultimatum. The deadline arrived. Iran did not comply. Trump did not strike. He extended the deadline. The new deadline arrived. Iran still did not comply. Trump extended it again. Iranian state media this week cited the foreign ministry calling Trump's move part of efforts to lower energy prices and buy time, and stated directly that there has been no negotiation and there is no negotiation, and that with this kind of psychological warfare, neither the Strait of Hormuz will return to its pre-war conditions, nor will there be peace in the energy markets. Psychological warfare. That is the Iranian government's official characterization of Trump's ultimatums. Not a credible military threat, psychological warfare designed to manage oil prices. And look at what happened to oil prices when Trump announced that first delay. International benchmark Brent crude fell more than 10% in a single trading session on Monday. It was sitting at just over $100 per barrel, which is $28 higher than immediately before the war started, but $18 below the previous week's peak. The withdrawal of the ultimatum produced an immediate 10% price drop, which is, from Trump's domestic political perspective, genuinely valuable. Rising energy prices are politically toxic heading into midterm election season, but what it reveals about the nature of the ultimatum itself is rather uncomfortable. A threat that is withdrawn before its deadline expires twice is not a threat. It is a request wearing aggressive clothing, and Iran understands that perfectly. And Iran is therefore not impressed by it. Consider Iran's 5-point counterproposal to the American 15-point peace plan, which was delivered through Pakistan as mediator. Iran's conditions include safeguards against future attacks on Iranian territory, the payment of war reparations, and a recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately a fifth of the world's oil supply passes, through which liquefied natural gas from Qatar moves to Europe and Asia, through which the energy supply chains of Japan, South Korea, India, and dozens of other economies run. Iran is demanding that the United States acknowledge Iran's right to control who passes through it. That is not a negotiating opening position that moves toward American objectives. That is a maximalist demand that, if accepted, would represent the single largest restructuring of the regional security architecture since the Second World War, and it would represent it entirely in Iran's favor. No American president could sign that agreement and survive politically. Not Trump, not a Democrat, not anyone. And Iran knows that, which is precisely why it is the demand they are making. Because making a demand you know cannot be accepted is itself a strategic signal. It tells you something about what Iran believes its position in this conflict actually is. The Iranian foreign minister said this week that an exchange of messages between the two countries through mediators does not constitute negotiations. He is maintaining the public fiction of no contact while the messages flow through Pakistan and Turkey and other intermediaries. Iran will not give the Americans the diplomatic legitimacy of calling it negotiations, but they will communicate at their own pace, on their own terms, maintaining the Hormuz blockade, continuing the missile strikes, watching the economic pressure accumulate in Western capitals and in Asian markets that depend on Gulf energy, and waiting to see whether April 6th becomes April 16th, which I suspect they already expect it will. And what of Israel in all this? Netanyahu said this week that his country would continue striking Iran and Lebanon even as the United States considers a ceasefire. He said he spoke to Trump, who told him there is a chance to leverage battlefield gains into an agreement that realizes the war's objectives. There is a chance, not there is an agreement, not we have aligned our positions. There is a chance. Jerusalem is reportedly concerned that Trump may announce a ceasefire with Iran as early as this coming Saturday, even before finalizing any actual understandings with Tehran on the 15-point proposal. Israel wants to continue striking. America wants an exit. And the gap between those two positions is widening rather than narrowing precisely as the diplomatic activity intensifies. Iran is simultaneously firing at Dimona and watching American and Israeli unity strain under the pressure. These are not coincidences. Iran's preferred conditions for negotiation have historically been to fight and talk at the same time from a position of demonstrated battlefield strength. That is what we are watching right now. The practical consequences extend well beyond the conflict itself. The United Nations Secretary General said this week that the prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz is choking the movement of oil, gas, and fertilizer at a critical moment in the global planting season. Over 1,000 ships, the majority of them oil tankers, remain stalled outside the strait. Approximately 20,000 seafarers are stranded at sea. The conflict that began as a military confrontation between Israel and Iran is now intersecting with the global food supply cycle. Fertilizer prices, which drive food production costs across Africa, South Asia, and Latin America, are being affected by a military standoff in the Persian Gulf. We have moved from a regional conflict to a food security crisis in the span of 4 weeks, and the deadline to resolve it has just been extended again to April 6th. Where does this leave us? The war is not close to ending. Israel's army chief said those words publicly this week, and I think they are the most honest summary of where we stand. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed. The missile strikes on both sides continue. The diplomacy is active but inconclusive. Iran is publicly denying negotiations while apparently participating in them. Trump is issuing ultimatums and then withdrawing them before they expire. Israel is watching the American diplomatic track with increasing alarm. And somewhere in the desert south of the Negev, the Shimon Nuclear Research Center sits 9 kilometers from where an Iranian ballistic missile landed last Saturday night. And the Israeli Air Force is insisting that the 2 interception failures were unrelated and non-systemic. That is where we are. That is what this week actually meant. And I think it is important to say that clearly, because the picture that emerges when you look at all of it together is not one of a conflict moving toward resolution. It is one of a conflict that has found a volatile and dangerous equilibrium where neither side is winning decisively. Both sides are absorbing costs, and the mechanisms that might prevent catastrophic miscalculation are under more strain than at any previous point in this war. Wherever you are watching from today, I wish you peace and safety.